Hi, I'm Annette Poulsen at the University of Georgia, and my co-authors and I were very pleased to be recognized by the readers of the Financial Review as having published the best paper of 2025 in the journal. So the paper is Dual Class Shares and Firm Valuation, Market-Wide Evidence from Regulatory Events. The paper is by myself and co-authored with Ugur Lel and Jeff Netter at the University of Georgia, and also Danny Chin, who was a PhD student here but now is on the faculty at Auburn University. The paper is about, the title describes what we're doing, dual class shares, companies that have chosen to have dual class voting structures, and then we're looking at the market-wide reaction to regulatory changes impacting the dual class share structures. So dual class share structures are cases where you have more than one class of voting shares, where some votes are relatively high votes and some shares are relatively low vote, and the use of those shares, predominantly the high vote shares are predominantly used by company founders or major investors, and the low vote shares are just the general public who might buy into the company. So the high vote shares allow a concentration of voting power amongst the founders or the major investors. So the question is that good or bad for shareholders in general? In the 1980s, it was a very controversial issue, and we saw a lot of debate and also regulatory changes related to those dual class voting structures. The exchanges had different rules. The SEC brought in various laws about whether or not you could use dual class voting structures, and that variability across the exchanges and across the time period with the SEC regulation allows us to look at how firms react to the different events. So those events, we did a market-wide event study, basically market-wide. When we changed what was going on at the New York Stock Exchange, how did it impact the New York Stock Exchange firms? When we changed allowing or not allowing dual class shares on NASDAQ, how did it impact the NASDAQ firms? And then when the SEC came in and said, no, you can't have this dual class voting structure, how did firms react? And then when the courts came in and said, yes, you can have a dual class voting structure, again, how did firm stock prices react? So looking at the market-wide impact is what's different about our study from previous analyses of dual class voting structures. And we think it's an important methodological change that can be used for other events across time. So our main findings are clear. Any event that made it more likely that you could have a dual class voting structure on the exchange or in general was, if it made it more likely, it had a negative impact on the share prices. If it made it less likely, it had a positive impact on the share prices. So that's what we found overall. But of course, there are arguments about why you might want to have a dual class share structure. The idea of managerial flexibility, allowing the founders of the company to have the ability to innovate and make changes quickly, versus the managerial entrenchment hypothesis that suggests that, well, by protecting those individuals, you are not necessarily going to have the firm act in the best interest of all shareholders. So we did dive deeper and look at whether or not there were some firms that benefited from the dual class share structure, and we did indeed find that those companies that had more R&D, that had more patents, were more likely to benefit at any event that increased the probability you could have dual class share structures. So overall, we think that the bottom line of the analysis is that in general, shareholders are very concerned about dual class voting structures, but it is the case that one size does not fit all, that it is the case that some companies benefit from having dual class share structures, and any regulatory approach that allows those firms to have that structure is probably consistent with better productivity. Thank you. I hope you have a chance to look at the paper. We enjoyed writing it. It was a lot of fun, and we hope to see your work soon also.